Welcome, everyone. It's Cheryl Barr, and I'm a mentor and coach to women entrepreneurs, actually, and men as well. And I'm also a master coach. I'm excited today to bring a special guest to talk with us, and her name is Jen Lee. And Jen, go ahead and just say hi, and I'll introduce you.
Hey everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Jen is a filmmaker and storyteller and producer, and Jen is. I actually saw Jen's film a couple years ago. Actually, it's been 3 years ago at World Domination Summit, and she's the director and producer of the documentary film, and it's Indie Kindred, and it's a fabulous film, and it's an intimate look at a creative collaboration with independent artists. And I've asked Jen to talk to us today about storytelling and also just about her work and how important story is when we're online so that we can connect and engage with our audience. And I also want to say that Jen is a publisher and producer and performer. And that's where I actually saw you doing the Moth radio hour. And from that, I was inspired to ask Jen to come and speak with us. So she is performer in New York storytelling scene, and she's been featured on public radio's Peabody Award-winning, again, Moth Radio Hour. Moth, as in the moth, M-O-T-H. Check it out if you haven't heard of that. And she was the best of the Moth, Volume 15. When was that, Jen? How long ago was that?
Um, that was a couple of years ago. That was a couple of years back. I think those collections are available on iTunes, I believe.
Yeah, they're there. And then you're also, what's new, and we'll talk about that here today as well. Jen is working on a special project. She's the co-author of the 10 Letters Project, and that's a year of art and friendship, which is fabulous. And one of the things I really love about you, you say, story is my art and connection is my mission. And I just think connection is so huge for us now. And what I would like to talk about first is how did you get into storytelling, and how did this tell us how you got into storytelling and filmmaking, or was filmmaking first and storytelling obviously is a big piece of that?
I actually started with storytelling first, and I was researching and learning about how to do storytelling for radio. That's actually how I started. And when a neighbor of mine found out, she asked me, "Well, have you heard of the Moth?" Which I hadn't. And she told me about that organization, and I tracked them down and I started telling stories live on stage here in New York City. And that was probably 6 or 7 years ago now. So I really was learning the art and craft of storytelling in front of live audiences here in New York. Um, and I used a lot of what I learned about how people I admired doing storytelling on the radio as part of that. And eventually I started teaching storytelling at art workshops with artists and makers, and just sharing some of what I learned, because I've learned a lot since I started. And everything I found, I kind of was cobbling together my own self-education. And I thought it would be nice for somebody if they could save themselves all of this work hunting down these tips and ideas. If I could just, gather what I've learned and put it together, I might save somebody else a little time. So that's how I started. Then I started filmmaking later. And really, that project, I've done projects in a lot of different formats. I've done audio projects where I go and record some of the courses that I've taught in person in a sound studio. I've done written work. And with the film that I did, Indie Kindred, it was really the story that I wanted to tell that determined the medium. Mm-hmm. And film seemed like the best way, because I was profiling, 10 independent artists. And if I used film, I could incorporate their visual art and their music and give all these additional layers. And when it was done, I was so excited, because I felt like, for the first time, this is maybe the closest thing to someone just being inside my brain and watching how my mind connects and weaves it all together, because it did have all the layers. It had people's words, it had people's images, the art, the music, um, all those things woven together, and that was really exciting.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah, and to work with all those artists as well. And so tell us, I work, as I said earlier, with entrepreneurs, and so many people are starting businesses these days, especially women, which is great to see. And how do you have any tips on telling a story? Like an original story or a story. I guess I would call it. For me, it's a signature story. I have two about how I got into doing what I'm doing today, and it's sort of my own little journey encapsulated into that. Well, first of all, tell us the importance of story, in connection, because that's part of your mission, and talk about that, and just anything you'd give us as far as how would someone begin to figure out what their story is.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to our business, I really think of story as being a really powerful source in establishing our credibility and also our relatability. I think those are things I look for myself when I'm looking to do business with someone. I'm asking myself questions, whether I know it or not. At the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is this person on a journey that I can relate to?
Mm-hmm.
Have they experienced challenges similar to the challenges I'm experiencing? And have they found a solution that's worked for them that could also be interesting to me?
Mm-hmm.
And if those things are given to me in an easy narrative, and if I have two different websites comparing different services, I'm going to go with the one that feels like a real person is there. And that's also the relatability piece. I think sometimes as women in business, we struggle with this idea of selling ourselves or our expertise or our service, and something about it, we don't want to feel like we're tricking somebody, or we don't want to feel slimy about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the best inroad in is to keep things as relational as possible. And that even if we're doing things across the internet, that we still really keep present to, like, I'm a real life three-dimensional human being hoping to connect with other real life three-dimensional human beings. And whether we're doing a business connection or a friendship or a professional connection, story to me is really the fabric of all relationship.
Mm-hmm.
All of my relationships are built on story. We're exchanging our stories all the time, whether I'm painting my neighbor's bedroom with her, or she's painting my bedroom with me, or if we're waiting at the bus stop, or if I'm talking to my colleagues after a show. It's always an exchange of story that's building that connection over time. And so I think there's a lot of ways to introduce a story. I think an obvious way we think of is on an about page, but inside every product or service that we offer, there's also a story about that too, because that is the culmination of some piece of our journey as well. And I think, I don't know, for me, I just think, okay, it's so hard for me. Sometimes things feel really impersonal when I'm looking at a computer screen, trying to think of words. And it's easier for me to think of, what if I was having coffee with someone who really wanted to know what I was up to? What would I say? And that sometimes helps me find a way in, just in terms of even the tone that I want to have. That's warm, relational, conversational.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. You have a product called How to Find Your Voice, and that's how I found you without realizing, making this connection. I saw your moth. I saw the indie film, Indie Kindred, and today I was looking and I went, "Oh, Jen, I brought this, product of yours, and it's so beautiful. It's How to Find Your Voice." And you've gone on and made so many more products. And I think it's this voice that we struggle with. What is my voice? And who am I? And actually, I had an experience I just want to share this morning. I'm doing a free call, and I used two stories about myself related to the product that I'm selling. It's about fear, and I really worked at this, because the reason I made the product was my story, was why my own journey through it, and here's my learnings. I've come through the other side. So I think you're so right about how would you want someone to come to your site and have it warm, just like if we're having coffee, so that I get the flavor of who you are, right then, instead of, impersonal and corporate or whatever, because we're humans. Do you have any tips that you might add for business? Because sometimes we think, and I know I've gone through this process myself, what is appropriate to share? And then Brene Brown's work has really brought more of us being more real and more vulnerable about who we are. And then I think her work has helped us connect and build a bridge of trust, because we're not perfect. And it's not that I'm saying we don't air our dirty laundry out on our blog or where else, but I know for me, the more I've shared my own personal experiences, the more connection I can have. What would you say about that, since connection is so important to you in your work?
It's really important to me, and this is kind of the conversation that I never stop having with my colleagues. The people I'm most interested in personally are people who are doing this same kind of work, and kind of working on this edge of how much vulnerability can I stand to incorporate. And for business, let me just think for a second. It's hard for me because I think about things a lot in terms of art. I know on stage we have to be really careful. A lot of us are telling very vulnerable and very personal things, but there's a fine line that we walk, because you never want to use it like therapy,
Mm-hmm.
and make someone feel like you're saying something that you should maybe be working through a therapist with.
Exactly.
You want to make sure that you're really in a place of feeling whole and complete with whatever's happened, and that anything that's unresolved, that you take care of that before you bring that to the stage. I think that's one thing that really helps, is just to make sure that whatever you're sharing, that you're doing with a really high level of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
But we have this tendency, especially, there's something about when it starts to involve business, that we think that our credibility is tied to an appearance of perfection. And I think that's really a fallacy. And even talking to a colleague of mine the other night who's working on a memoir, we were laughing because she was saying, out of everyone in her story, if anyone's going to look like the bad guy or the jerk, that it's her. And we were laughing, and I was saying that's really how it should be. And that even though there's an arc and you can see her story, you can see her growing and operating at a level by the end that's more loving and more maybe mature, and someone who's learned something,
Mm-hmm.
that she is looking for ways and really doing an amazing job of still being a very human being by the end.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's the thing for us, is that even though we're telling a story about here's where I started, here's where I am now, that we still remind ourselves that it's okay to let people know that we're a human being.
Yeah, they're not.
It's still okay to mention some of those things. And in fact, it makes it easier for us to like people and not be like, forget her. I can't relate to that at all.
Yeah.
I want to work with people that I can relate with, and it makes me chuckle sometimes when people make comments or let you have a window in to know that their house isn't always like entirely pristine and perfect, and their hair isn't always like never out of place. You know what I mean?
Totally.
So, and how to share that and how much to share it is really an individual thing that everyone has to work out for themselves. And I think our capacity for vulnerability is something we can really stretch and expand over time. Yeah. And sometimes it just starts with a small thing of saying, okay, how can I let myself still be a human being who's holding all of my experiences, all my expertise, all of my knowledge, and still has real world challenges, just like everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of balance is really, that's really something to strive for.
I just think that what you said is so true about letting people in to see the window of who you really are. And that is the tricky part. And I think I've seen it with me. It's been an evolution. It's not cut and dry, but it's almost like taking one step forward with courage and sharing a little bit, seeing what the response is. And engagement, did people, engage? Did they reach out and did they say, I saw myself in that? It's that human connection, that we're all in this human experience, and how can I relate to you as a human being? And that's what it is. I think story just helps us.
It helps people to know also that I think I used to just think there's something wrong with me because this is hard, and when will this become easier? And it helps me a lot to figure out it always feels hard. Like I grew up really believing that if I could just manage my public appearance and look really good, that I could protect myself, and that was like the pathway to safety. And it takes a lot to dismantle that kind of paradigm and to try something else. And every time I step on stage to tell a story, every time I turn on my camera for a video diary, anytime I write something that feels a little raw and post it, I'm always wanting to climb out of my skin every time. And I think what's helped is now I don't expect that to go away. Now I just know, okay, this is a sign that this is close to the heart. This is a sign that it's important that I care about it.
Yeah. I think that's really true. I don't think we ever grow out of it. And I was talking today on my call about the signs of fear and how fear is disguised, and perfectionism. And I'm a recovering perfectionist, I'd like to think. And I like to say that it's okay that things are messy and they're not perfect. Because perfectionism underneath it is I'm not good enough. And that's why we strive to hold that shield, that mask up. And it takes a lot of courage to dismantle that. And it takes a lot of years to dismantle it because it's so insidious.
Not a 5-minute fix.
No, and then there's so many disguises that fear has, and it's about being conscious and also being willing to be brave. That's what it is. But it's a beautiful thing when you can connect to someone through your story and see their humanity and who they are, or their wit, or their courage, or their trials. So I just appreciate everything you've said about this. Could you share about your work? And I'm curious about when you started, because it's been years since I bought How to Find Your Voice, and you've made lots more products, and of course the film Indie Kindred was in there, and your tour, and I wanted you to share your new product, talk about your new project that you're co-producing, but talk to us about how you've come, what's your arc in creativity and storytelling from, say, the last 6 years that you've been doing this. You started as a film, you started as a storyteller, then a filmmaker.
Yeah, and before I was doing storytelling, I was writing online. I had produced my first publishing project, which was a journal, and maybe a couple other things. But yeah, I started storytelling. I was teaching. I was producing a lot of my own projects and projects for other artists as well. And then I made my film Indie Kindred, which is about creative collaboration. And what I'm working on right now, really for the next few years, is I'd like to work to support and help build local creative communities. So I do a lot of other projects, but that's kind of the big umbrella that's holding them all. And so now I'm looking at creating resources that people can use when they actually gather with other people closer to home. So I have the film that some people do screenings of, invite people over and watch the film and use that as kind of a jumping off point. And then this year I came out with a book with my colleague Tim Manley, who is an author and illustrator who I met through the New York City storytelling scene. And we started a project called the 10 Letters Project that really began because I was nearing the end of my film tour. It was my first film project, and he was approaching the release of his first book, which is called Alice in Timberland. And so we were kind of in the middle of these high peak moments, and we started to keep a correspondence just to try to catch all these little, like, so many little stories were happening to us, and there were so many things that we were thinking about and questions we had to ask each other. And so we started keeping a correspondence that then was actually so useful that we repeated it a couple times, and we ended up um, really cataloging an entire year of art and friendship. We wrote 60 letters over the course of a year in total. And part of what we loved about it was that it didn't just catch the high moments, but it really caught some low moments and some real challenges and all these days in between. And I felt like that's kind of a view of the maker's life that people aren't always giving. Yes. Usually we're only talking to people in their high peak moment. We're like, it's the debut, it's the release. But nobody ever says, what do you do when the tour is over? And how do you put your body back together?
Yeah.
And what do you do when it's winter? And what do you do when there's loss in your life? And what do you do when your next ideas keep getting shut down? You know? And so it's really kind of a behind-the-scenes look. Mm-hmm. And the letters were so helpful to us that we thought they might be helpful to others too, as well as just the idea for the project. So we've really encouraged people to consider trying a 10 Letters project of their own, because especially as people who work from home and who have kind of a solitary experience, yes, it's nice to have kind of that like Friday night water cooler experience. Mm-hmm. And someone you can just talk shop with.
Yeah.
And say, the craziest thing happened, or I'm really stuck. And it wasn't the kind of thing, we had an agreement, like, we weren't there to fix each other. But just having someone hear it and get it, and someone who's believing in you and cheering you on, is really all you need. So that is now available in paperback on Amazon. So this summer, I'm taking my daughters with me on a short summer tour. We're going to be doing live events in Colorado, and then we're going to go up by the Great Lakes, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan. And all of those dates and details are on my website.
So funny, we do work solo as solopreneurs. I've been doing this alone since 1996, an early pioneer virtual worker. And that's a real, your mind, you're left with your mind.
I know.
And that's the big,
nice place
it's not pretty. It's not pretty sometimes. And so
I know.
It can be a dream killer when you're by yourself. And this is a beautiful way to connect, because I really don't have someone that I connect with every week and say, wow, how was your week? Were you able to get things done and laugh about things that don't work? Or I laugh about that now, but I used to freak out,
Yeah.
But
it makes a big difference, and it's also part of the reason why I'm traveling to these places is to help create those local gathering spaces where people can have someone nearby, because it's also really nice to have someone who's like, hey, let's go get a drink, let's go grab coffee, Having that takes it to a whole other level, and I think serves as a really nice counterbalance to the amount of online relating that we're doing so much now.
Yeah, it can be tricky. It can fool us that we have connection. I feel like I have connection, but it's not as deep as this could be, which is helpful for a shared experience. It's that shared connection. So anything else you want to share about your project, or you can buy the book on Amazon?
Yes, the 10 Letters Project is available on Amazon, and Indie Kindred is as well on DVD. Or if people prefer to stream it, it's available on indiekindred.com. You can rent it online. So there are a lot of ways to find it, but yeah, my website, you can find more at jenleeproductions.com.
And that's L-E-E, Jen Lee.
L-E-E. And sign up for updates and news.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's it. I'm just really excited to speak with you today.
Oh, thank you so much.